Hi everyone, my name is Carmen Beaumont. I'm the Director of Vida Psychology. Today I wanted to invite Ishma Alvi, who is our Senior Clinician, to talk to us about eating disorders and how people are being impacted in our current times. Ishma sees people presenting with eating disorders. So Ishma, can I let you introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. Hi, I am the senior clinician at Vida Psychology. And yes, even amongst the clients I see, I do see clients presenting with eating disorders. I'm also seeing an amplification of those features in those clients who have that diagnosis. Some of the symptoms have become more severe than they were prior to the onset of the pandemic.
Okay, so could you tell me on that note, what is it that you're noticing, or what is it that some of the clients that you're supporting are reporting to you that they might be struggling with? Do you see a kind of setback, so to speak, or relapse, or looking at maybe duration and severity of the symptoms? What is it that you've noticed?
Well, it's across the board. So I'll try to address that as simply as possible. So overall, there seems to be an increased anxiety that's applying to almost every level or every arm of the disorder. And it's quite a complex, long-standing disorder. So that's one thing, just an increased level of anxiety around each feature. Now, because this disorder is typically very, very long-standing, and it's a disorder that's hard to shake, a lot of the behaviors that clients with this disorder have become normalized to them and ritualized as a part of their everyday life. Now, if everyday life changes in terms of access to gyms, access to exercise, access to safe
Yes.
foods, access to comfortable eating rituals and patterns, all becomes shaken up, there's an overall anxiety and a sense of a loss of control. And
Yes.
typically that's what anxiety hinges around, just and feeling like you've lost control, feeling there's an impending loss.
Yes.
And so that's led to somewhat of an escalation. At the initial phase, it started around accessing safe food. So a lot of people with eating disorders, regardless of whether it's the bulimic type or the anorexic type or the not otherwise specified type, have lists of foods that they consider safe. And food can exist on a spectrum that is almost binary, in fact, less spectrum. So these are the safe foods and these are the high risk foods. And accessing those safe foods, whatever they are, obviously became harder to do when the shelves were empty in supermarkets. So initially there was that burgeoning anxiety of, will I be able to eat as I feel safe eating?
Yes.
Now, as that abated, other issues rose to the surface. So number one, working from home became a threat. It became a threat because a lot of people, it's not just how much you eat that defines an eating disorder. It's many things. For example, it's the when you eat. So a lot of people have a pattern about when they are permitted to eat certain foods. So they might be the type who feel like, well, during the day, I'm away from the house, I'm away from safe spaces and foods to eat, so I just won't eat and I feel in control and distracted. But if you're working from home, you have access, you have
Mhm.
constant exposure, and you don't have the distraction as much as you would with a physical work environment. So
Yes.
that increases anxiety. I have access to my fridge, I have access to my pantry.
Yes.
And that means I don't just exercise a lack of access that makes it easier for me to restrict calories. I have to actually exercise willpower, and that's something that is burdens anxiety.
Yes.
Another thing that happens inadvertently is hoarding is a feature of pandemic panic buying, but it's also a feature of eating disorders.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people with eating disorders may not want food, but may hoard food, even sometimes food they don't eat just because it's there.
Yeah.
And the relationship with food and anxiety is goes sometimes beyond weight. It's just the food itself becomes a huge focus. And so you have an environment that's saying stock up, and then you have a part of your disorder that's saying the same thing and knowing it's not safe to do it. So there's that push-pull of, all right, now the world is saying I should stock up, but I know that's a feature of my illness. How do I deal? So
Yeah.
things get complicated. And
Yeah, and as you
what
said, that's also very difficult because, as you said, there's that anxiety of having that access to food, and if you're hoarding food as part of your eating disorder, then it's really hard not to exacerbate that anxiety anyway, because you know that there's a lot of food at home that you can freely have access to, and so easy
exactly?
be accessed as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Because what people don't realize is that eating disorders are not about people exercising tremendous amounts of willpower. It's people exercising tremendous amounts of control externally. They
Yes.
make their world safe. Their pantry only has safe foods. Their fridge only has safe foods. The exercise routines are set just so. So it's
Yeah.
not an internal control, it's an external one. And
Yeah.
once they're exposed to their triggers, there's no control because that's not what they're using anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that just melts away.
Yeah. So what do you think would be helpful, or what would be some of the tips or suggestions that you're giving people in these circumstances? Because once again, food is something that is very difficult to move away from. It's something that it's a need. It's a biological need. It's not a
Yeah,
want. It's something that our body needs anyway. So
yeah. So it's not like cigarettes, so it's not like drugs where you can just exclude them. And so it's such a tightrope. And so here we have in this tightrope a thing that is trigger for anxiety, but also a feature that I'm just going to unpack that can sometimes be helpful. Those people who are isolating with family and partners have a lot of their eating rituals now exposed. They
yes,
could get away with it. It
yes,
could be it could be the elephant in the room that
yes.
they could just get away with because nobody was in the house long enough to see.
To notice, yes,
And now it's there. The
yes,
children, the partner, a new partner, they're all exposed. And
yes,
that's terrifying. But
yes,
here is an opportunity to make one of the first steps.
yes,
The naming, just
yes,
naming what we have here.
yes,
Now, with the long-standing clients, a lot of them have already done that. But
mm,
for clients who are newly engaging, we try to look at how we can restructure that anxiety and not see it as a source of withdrawal, but a source of leaning in and coming forward and saying, yep, yep, I see this. I see this is not typical. I see this as not healthy. Yep, I'm owning it. I have this.
yeah. And that will be quite a huge step therapeutically, acknowledging and owning it and naming it.
Mhm.
And that I would imagine that it can be scary. I don't treat eating disorders as such, but it would be quite scary being so vulnerable and making it real. By acknowledging it
Mhm.
and naming it, you are making it real. It's not just something that, maybe some people have noticed, or that you think, oh, that's okay, there's no issue
Mhm.
here, I don't have any difficulties with this,
Yes,
but you're making it real. And
you're
that's
owning it.
yeah,
And society helps cover up eating disorders because it normalizes these weird ritualistic eating habits, particularly for women. It's
yes,
normal for women to take tiny bites. You're being ladylike if you don't stuff your face.
yes,
So it's almost approved of to maintain certain types of eating and to identify that with gender even.
yes,
Um, Sometimes class. So it's interesting how these things can become normalized. So yes, you're absolutely right. The ownership and the naming is terrifying. And that's where I might bring in other strategies outside of my typical go-to, which is usually CBT. And here is where I might be borrowing from some features of ACT that I've become more comfortable with over time, such as looking at sitting with the emotion, naming emotions. I often give my clients something that is an emotional word list. I know it sounds patronizing, but it's amazing how often we can just say, I feel terrible. And
yes,
I help them unpack what's this terrible. Once you name it, you can sit with it more easily instead of this big, uncomfortable bucket of terrible.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it's about the process of ownership is not going to happen overnight, but it's about soothing them and letting them sit instead of react to anxiety. Sit instead of react to fear. And then it's also a trust building exercise. Trust your family, trust your friends and your partners, trust them not to judge, trust them to hold. And sometimes that involves educating partners and family members, not necessarily including them in the therapy, unless the client is happy and consenting and willing, and we can both see that it will be helpful. Actually just giving resources to the client to share.
Yeah.
Because it's a challenging thing for partners to live with as well.
Yeah. And I would imagine for other family members too, if you have children.
If you have children, yes.
Yeah. So that would...
It's a tricky space to navigate for a lot of people. And because it's such a long-standing disorder, yes, young people are hugely affected, but that does not mean people of a certain generation. And unfortunately, it is usually, not always, but usually women of a certain generation, only now in their 40s and their 50s coming to recognize their challenging relationships with food and their bodies.
Yeah, good. So any tips? Not that you haven't given any tips anyway, but any what other tips would you have for people, especially for those people who haven't quite recognized or acknowledged to themselves that they're having an eating disorder? What would you say to them?
I would say so this is where I would say, how about you track yourself? Don't have to do anything about it, just name it. Just do a naming exercise, maybe a thought diary, and see what's happening so you can unpack what it is that's making you feel this way. Let's see if you can come up with a name for it that is more comfortable for you. What's happening? You're at home, your husband's upstairs, and you want to open the pantry, but you're scared to open the pantry in front of him. What's happening there? What's the thinking? What's that discomfort coming from? What will happen if he sees you? And what will happen if you open the pantry? What's the conversion? So one of the tips is monitor yourself. Slow yourself down enough instead of racily jumping from trigger to reaction. Slow down. Be like, okay, I feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
What's happening here? So number one, name it. Number two, slow down.
Yeah.
Just slow down. Just because it feels bad doesn't mean it is bad.
Yeah. Good. And what about exercise? And as you said, not having access to gyms at the moment. And I've heard that there might be some gyms opening up soon, but some people are still having reservations in returning to gyms. But there's also running, jogging and other activities that people can do. What are your insights on eating disorders and exercise?
So here's another, this is such a complex disorder, but here's where we come to a tricky area where I fundamentally believe that exercise is a big part of mental health, just like sleep, socializing, and diet. But here, a lot of people with an eating disorder exercise reactively, not responsively. Exercise is done in response to fear and anxiety, not in response to a desire for health. It's actually a fearful need for control. So it's about recognizing that it's okay not to exercise 6 days a week.
Yes.
Okay, I'm not asking you to sit down and collapse and not do any exercise ever again. It's not all or nothing. It's okay to sit in the gray area and learn to detach exercise from physical cues. Oh, I feel my stomach bloating. I should go for a walk. Yes. Oh, I just ate a big meal, or I'm going to eat a big meal, so I'm going to preemptively or reactively go for a run or do 100 push-ups. I'm just going to sit. My exercise is about my health, not about how my body feels.
Yes. So changing then, or reviewing that relationship and the relationship that you have with exercise is important.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And again, it's a tricky area. You need food to survive. You need exercise for mental health.
Yes.
But it's just the connections that have been made in the minds of those with eating disorders. They connect the things that are connected are unhelpful and not necessarily valid. So maintaining food, but making the connections healthier. Maintaining exercise, but making the connections healthier.
Yeah. That's good. Great. Well, thank you for that information,
Pleasure.
Ishma. So, I'm sure that, well, I know for a fact that your clients are benefiting from that. And I
hope so.
and I would like other people in the community to also benefit from this video. And I'm sure that that's going to be the case. So thank you for making yourself available.
Not at all. Pleasure. Anytime.
See ya.
See
Bye.
you. Bye.